Hey guys, welcome back to Java Code Analyzer by Mac. Before we start, please click on the subscribe button and click on the bell icon to be notified for the next videos. So let's get started. So for today, we have taken constructors in Java. So basically, a constructor is nothing but it is a special method which is used to initialize the objects. So it is called when an object of a class is created and constructors have the same name as the class name and we do not have any return type. Okay, so that is called as a constructor. Now let us try to understand this practically, guys. Okay, let me switch to Eclipse. So here we could see that we have a class called as Apple, right? So I've created a class called as Apple. Now what is a constructor? A constructor is nothing but it is a special method. So method usually consists of a name. So but constructor usually consists of a name which is same as the class name. So what is the class name, guys? The class name is Apple. So let me try to create the constructor. So I have given a constructor name. Now as constructor is a special method, so I'm trying to include this to open close braces, right? And similarly, let me try to have open close braces with respect to a method. So this is called as a constructor. So what is a constructor? A constructor is nothing but it is a special method which has the same name as that of the class name. That is called as a constructor. Okay. Now you might think why do we need to create a constructor? We have to create a constructor. The major use of the constructor, guys, is to initialize the instance variable or the variables that are specific to a particular class, right? Do we have an instance variable in this class? No, we don't have. Now let me try to add some instance variable here. I'll be taking one particular variable int of a as one variable, and let me try to take one more variable int of b. So these are called as instance variables because these variables are defined directly within a class outside any method. Okay, so these are called as instance variables. So the use of the constructor is basically to initialize these variables during the object creation. So when will this constructor will be called, guys? This constructor will be called at the time of object creation. Why do we call the constructor? We call the constructor because we will be trying to initialize the instance variable, or we have to initialize the instance variable. So that's the reason we will be trying to call the instance variable. Trying to call the constructor. Now here I have defined the constructor. Can we see any return type for this, guys? Like for example, if I'm trying to create a method like public void add, I have created one method add. So what is the return type for this particular method add? The return type is void. Can we see something here as void? No, right? Because a constructor will not have any return type. It might be void as well. So will not define any return type for a constructor. So first, what is a constructor? The constructor is nothing but it is a special method which will have the same name as that of the class name, and it is called at the time of object creation. For the use of the constructor is to initialize the instance variable. So this is basic concept of constructor, right? Now let me try to have one particular main method. So I've created a main method, right? So this is the main method. This is a public static void main. So this is a main method, and this is a constructor, right? So now let me try to initialize these two variables at the time of object creation by using the constructor. So how to do that is, this particular constructor can take parameters. Int of, let me try to take two parameters, int of x comma int of y, right? So I have taken two parameters here. For what? For the constructor. Now this particular two parameters will help me in initializing this instance variable. So how it will do that is, so whatever the value I'll be getting from X, I'll assign it to A. And whatever the value I'm getting it from Y, I will assign it to B, right? So this X and Y variables I've taken, or the arguments I've taken for an constructor, because to initialize this instance variable. And this kind of constructor is called as an parameterized constructor. Look at here, guys. So the parameterized constructor is nothing but a constructor which is used to initialize an instance variables, or with the help of an object with specific values. That is called as a parameterized constructor. So this is a parameterized constructor that I have taken. So this is called as parameterized constructor. Let me try to name it. So parameterized constructor. Now, whatever the constructor that I have taken here, right? So this is called as parameterized constructor. Okay. Now, the constructor that I have taken here is a parameterized constructor which will take two arguments, right? X and Y. Now, let me try to initialize the instance variable A and B with the help of this constructor. So, when will a constructor be called? The constructor will be called at the time of object creation. So, let me try to create an object for the class Apple. Apple A is equals to new Apple. So, I have tried to create a constructor. Now, the constructor that I am trying to call is this one, right? So, here I am suggested that I should call the parameterized constructor only, because if a user has not defined this particular parameterized constructor, at that time we will be, by default, we will be calling the non-parameterized constructor or the default constructor. So for example, like this guy, suppose like I have not defined this constructor, just consider as an example, I have not defined. So at that time I will call this constructor which is non-parameterized. Now you might ask, then how we will initialize this instance variable? Yes, we can't initialize this instance variable. Later we have to make the reference of this particular A, like example A dot, okay, let me try to rename this as object. Okay, I'm just trying to rename it as object. So now let me try to initialize the instance variable A to something like 10, right? So like this we have to initialize if we are not defining the parameterized constructor. But if we are defining the parameterized constructor, then with the help of the constructor itself, or at the time of object creation, we can try to initialize the instance variables. Okay, so now let me try to initialize the instance variable, guys. Let me try to give the value of 8 as 12, and let me try to give the value of B as 13. So I have initialized the instance variables. What are the instance variables? Integer A and integer B. Now when will this instance variable will be initialized? At the time of object creation. Let me try to show you guys. Okay, I'll keep a debug point, guys, and let me try to keep a debug point here as well, and let me try to show you. So right click, debug as Java application. See, now during the execution always starts from the main method, right? The execution point for in Java is always a main method. So now we have started. So now if I am going with respect to the variables here, we could see that here the instance value are not initialized yet, right? So now once I execute this, I'll be moving to the constructor directly. Right, now let me go to the variables, guys. See, here we could see I have passed the value of X as 12 and Y as 13, right? So where is this X and Y coming from? The value for X and Y is coming from constructor, right? From here it is coming from constructor. So now what I will do, I'll try to initialize this constructor values to A and B, right? So let me try to initialize. So what is the value of X? The value of X is 12. So now what will be the value of A? The value of A will be 12. And what will be the value of B? B will be 13. So at the time of object creation, we have called the constructor. Okay. So when an constructor will be called? A constructor will be called at the time of object creation. Right. Now let me try to print the values, guys. So let me try to add the println statements, system.out.println. Let me try to add the println statement. So a dot, okay, let me try to rename the reference variable instead of a as object, and now let me try to call the instance variable a and the instance variable b, right? So let me try to call those two variables. Yes. So now run as Java application. So now we could see that the value of a is 12 and the value of b is 13, right? So how did we initialize the particular instance variable a and b? With the help of constructor we have initialized. So whenever there is a requirement that we have to initialize the instance variable, we can go with the constructor and we can try to initialize them. Okay, and this is called as a parameterized constructor. Okay, now whenever a user has not defined this kind of parameterized constructor, then in that case the default constructor will be invoked. But this initialization user has to do explicitly, because the JVM will be providing the default initialization for the instance variable. Now you might say, what is the default initialization? What is the default value for integer, guys? The default value for integer is 0, right? So that JVM will be providing, and here we could see that the value of a and b is 0, because this is the default value which is provided by JVM for the instance variable, right? So now major thing with respect to the initialization of the instance variable can be done with the help of constructor, right? And there are two types of constructor: default constructor and parameterized constructor. So first thing, guys, what are the major key points for the constructor? A constructor must have the same name as that of the class name, right? Do we have that? Yes, we have the same name as that of the class name, right? We have here. So now what is the second thing? The constructor will never have a return type. Do we have a return type here, guys? No, we don't have a return type, right? Next thing is, if no constructor is I-defined, Java provides the default constructor automatically. Okay, let me try to, we just saw, let me try to show one more time. So I'll just try to delete this and let me try to delete the variables and let me try to call. So like this, if we are not defining any constructor explicitly. So at this particular time, the JVM will call the default constructor. Okay, now let me try to one more time, let me try to add the parameterized constructor. Okay, now constructor can be overloaded, that is, having multiple constructor with different parameters can be achieved. Okay, now what is the parameters that we have with respect to this constructor, guys? We have two parameters, the int x and int y. Now suppose there is a requirement that we just have to initialize the integer variable a, which is an instance variable. Can we do with this? We can do with this, but we will be even initializing the variable b, right? So now what I will do, I'll try to overload the constructor. I'm overloading. But here what I will do, I'll just try to pass one particular variable or one particular argument. Now with this constructor, how many variables, instance variable can I initialize? I can initialize only one instance variable. So this is called as a constructor overloading. Okay, this is called as a constructor overloading. Constructor overloading is nothing but we'll be having the multiple constructor more than one, but will be varying with the number of arguments or the type of argument. That is called as a constructor overloading. Okay, now by doing this, we can initialize as many instance variable as we can. We can try to modify or we can try to configure our constructor in a way that we can try to initialize on our need. Okay, like here I don't want to initialize y, so I'm trying to define this particular constructor. Now let me try to call that particular constructor. So for that, I'll have to create an object. So let me try to create an object. For that, let me try to define one more instance variable, guys, int of c, and let me try to initialize to c, and let me try to create an object. Now when will this constructor will be invoked? At the time of object creation. Okay, so I'm trying to create one more object, object 1. So let this be object and this is object 1. Now let me try to call the variable with respect to this, right? So let me try to give the value as 100, guys, and let me try to print object 1 dot c, right? So I'm trying to initialize the variable c with this particular constructor. So I'm trying to call this particular constructor. Now at this object creation, which two instance variable will be initialized? The initialization will be done for these two variables. At this particular object creation, which instance variable will be initialized? The C variable will be initialized. So now let me try to execute, run as Java application. See, here we can see that the variable A, instance variable A is initialized with 12, the instance variable B is initialized with 13, and the instance variable C is initialized with 100, right? So this is called as a constructor overloading. Constructor overloading is nothing but a constructor, more than one constructor, but varying with the arguments, number of arguments or types of argument can be considered as constructor overloading. Now a constructor will not have cannot have static. We cannot define a constructor as static, right? Well, we cannot define, and we cannot define a constructor as final as well. Okay, so we cannot define a constructor as final, we cannot define a constructor as static. Okay, so this is called as an concept or the major concept of constructor, guys. Okay, what is a constructor? A constructor is nothing but it is a special method which will be having the same name as that of the class name, and the major use of constructor is to initialize the instance variable. A constructor will be called at the time of object creation, and if a user has not defined the user defined constructor, then default constructor will be invoked by the JVM. So this is the concept of constructor, guys. Thanks for watching. Please do subscribe and click on the like button.